Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz, 1926–2016, was one of the most emblematic and controversial figures of the 20th century, whose influence shaped Cuba's history and global politics for nearly 5 decades. Castro's rise to power began with armed struggle against the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, culminating in the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. Following this, he ruled Cuba as Prime Minister, 1959–1976. And subsequently as President of the Council of State and the Council of Ministers, 1976–2008, establishing a one-party state with tight control over the political, economic, and social life of the country. Castro emerged as a charismatic leader and a compelling orator, capable of mobilizing broad segments of society through passionate speeches and anti-imperialist rhetoric. His discourse emphasized social justice, economic equality, and national sovereignty, which allowed him to gain substantial popular support, particularly among the poorest sectors of Cuban society. The Cuban Revolution became a symbol of resistance against U.S. influence in Latin America, and Castro was seen by many as a defender of the ideals of self-determination and anti-imperialism. However, Castro's government was not without controversy. The centralization of political power in his hands and the absence of free elections led to the establishment of an authoritarian system. Press freedom, freedom of expression, and the right to organize were heavily restricted, while political opponents were persecuted, imprisoned, or forced into exile. Economically, Cuba implemented a centrally planned model and nationalized private businesses and property. While this achieved notable successes in education and healthcare, it also limited productivity, innovation, and led to growing dependence on the Soviet Union until its collapse in 1991. Internationally, Castro played a pivotal role during the Cold War. His alliance with the Soviet Union placed Cuba at the center of major geopolitical conflicts, most notably the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear confrontation. Additionally, Castro's Cuba supported revolutionary movements and socialist governments across Latin America, Africa, and Asia, cementing its reputation as an exporter of revolution, though these interventions often generated diplomatic tensions with the United States and other Western powers. Despite his authoritarianism, Fidel Castro achieved remarkable social accomplishments. Cuba attained near-universal literacy and developed a robust healthcare system accessible to the entire population. These achievements contrast sharply with the country's economic struggles and the restriction of political freedoms, creating an ambivalent legacy. On one hand, a leader who promoted social rights and national sovereignty, and on the other, a ruler who curtailed fundamental civil liberties and maintained a one-party state. Castro's leadership style combined revolutionary zeal with strict political control. He relied on personal charisma and ideological commitment to consolidate authority, often portraying himself as the guardian of the revolution against both internal and external threats. His ability to maintain power for nearly half a century speaks to his political acumen, adaptability, and skill in cultivating loyalty among military and party elites. Yet, this concentration of power also meant that the Cuban state remained highly dependent on his personal authority, creating a political structure that could be fragile without his presence. Economically, Castro's Cuba pursued policies of industrialization, agrarian reform, and social welfare programs, with varying degrees of success. While healthcare and education were revolutionized, economic growth remained limited, and consumer goods were scarce. The collapse of the Soviet Union precipitated a severe economic crisis in the 1990s, known as the Special Period, highlighting the vulnerabilities of a centrally planned economy heavily reliant on foreign support. Despite this, Castro managed to maintain social stability and continue providing basic services, demonstrating the regime's capacity to endure prolonged external pressures. Cuba under Castro also became a beacon for anti-colonial and revolutionary movements worldwide. From supporting guerrilla movements in Latin America to sending doctors and advisors to Africa and Asia, Castro's foreign policy emphasized solidarity with nations seeking independence or socialist transformation. While these efforts earned him admiration among global leftist circles, they also fueled accusations of meddling in other countries' affairs and provoked confrontations with the US and its allies. Fidel Castro's legacy is thus deeply contested. Supporters praise him as a symbol of resistance against imperialism, a champion of social justice, and a leader who prioritized education, healthcare, and national sovereignty. Critics, however, denounce his authoritarianism, the suppression of political freedoms, and the economic hardships that his policies imposed on Cubans. The dichotomy of his rule, advancing social rights while restricting political liberties, makes Castro one of the most complex and polarizing figures of modern history. In summary, Fidel Castro represents a paradoxical figure, a revolutionary hero to some, an authoritarian ruler to others. His tenure illustrates the tensions between social transformation and political control, between national sovereignty and global geopolitics. Castro's impact on Cuba and the world remains a subject of ongoing debate, reflecting the enduring relevance of questions about leadership, ideology, and the trade-offs inherent in radical political change.